I'm Charlie Higson, probably the greatest writer in the world. A writer, shall we say. And my latest book is called The Sacrifice. It's the fourth book in a series that we call The Enemy, which is it's essentially children against adult zombies. So the idea is a disease has hit the planet which only affects adults and either kills them or turns them into zombies. And they try and eat the kids, and the kids try and smash their brains out. It's a bit like Enid Blyton. So yeah, Sacrifice is the fourth book in the series, and it continues the adventures of a character from the first book called Small Sam. In the first book, there's a group of kids who are living in Waitrose on the Holloway Road, and they set off across London to find somewhere safer, but they get split up, and a character called Small Sam ends up on the wrong side of town. And in The Sacrifice, he sets off across London to try and reunite himself with his sister, but he gets waylaid by some kids who've basically set up their own religious cult. Question: why are the undead everywhere at the moment? Why are we suffering this plague of vampires and zombies? And there's comics, books, films, TV series, games. And kids particularly are obsessed with zombies. I do a lot of events in schools, and the kids all have their own zombie survival plans already worked out. Some teachers even use it as a teaching aid, as a way of teaching kids about the world and how it works and survival and stuff. So and I don't know why this has happened. I mean, sometimes things just become successful because they're successful. But I mean, one theory I have is that they seem to be quite doom-laden times we're living in at the moment, with the kind of collapse of the environment and ecology and species going extinct and changes in weather patterns and global warming. And there's a sort of feeling that perhaps the world might be ending. But people don't want to think about that real apocalypse coming, so it's easy to think about a made-up one. So we can all worry about zombies, because that's not going to happen. I suppose also the influence of people like Tim Burton with that whole sort of goth, slightly morbid thing has been growing over the last few years. And zombies are very easy to impersonate as well. So people love dressing up as dead things. I did an event at my kids' school. Well, I didn't. I went along. They'd been doing a thing called First Story, which is this charity that goes into schools and they do a creative writing course with kids after school, and they send real writers in to work with the kids. And I went down because some of the kids were reading their stories out, and they were all really nasty, violent, gory, quite upsetting stories. I can't complain because that's what I write, but I spoke to one of these girls after. I said, it's quite dark, your story. She said, what you've got to understand is that kids love death. So maybe that's, kids love death. I didn't choose to write the Young Bond books. I was approached by the Ian Fleming estate completely out of the blue. And when they first approached me, it was all very hush-hush and secretive. James Bond is a very valuable franchise, and they don't like stuff to leak out. And I think working on the fringes of MI6 over the years has kind of rubbed off on them a bit. And they said we've got this top secret new Bond project where we're trying to revitalise interest in the literary side of James Bond and remind people about Ian Fleming and how it all started and what a great writer he was. And we're looking for proper writers to write new James Bond books. And at that point I thought, oh my God, how would you go about that? Where would you start trying to write a new James Bond, come up with something that hadn't been done by Ian Fleming or in all the consequent writers who took over after him and all the films, of course. And I just thought, well, I wouldn't know where to start. They said, no, what we're talking to you about is doing young James Bond. And at that point it sort of just suddenly clicked in my mind. I could see how it worked, and there was enough space for me to come to it because Fleming had written virtually nothing about Bond's childhood. So I thought, well, yes, you can do something fresh with that. There was room for my own input, and I thought, you could scale down all that Bond stuff and you could make it work on a level that kids could relate to. So even as they were talking to me, I sort of had the idea for the first book fully formed. I think the most obvious reason why Bond has endured is that they've had the courage to keep replacing the actor, and in doing so they've been able to reinvent it for each new generation, so that it kind of works for the times that it's set in and the types of films that are being made and the types of heroes that people are looking for. I suppose similar to what they've done with Doctor Who and also maybe Sherlock Holmes as well. If they've managed to keep updating it, but there is a strong enough kit, a James Bond kit, that as long as you have those parts in it, you can sort of tinker around and make it modern and do other stuff with it. So you've got to have Bond, you've got to have M, you've got to have a Bond villain, you've got to have the girls, you've got to have the cars, the glamorous locations, dinner jacket, bow tie. They got rid of Q, but I should imagine they'll probably bring him back one day, and Moneypenny as well. But I think there's still a strong enough set of things that make it recognisably James Bond, and if they keep that, they can do what they like with the other stuff. So and the fact that it has been a family concern, the films, has meant they've been able to properly control it and stop it being mucked about with. And it's a very strong basis it is built on. The Fleming books. It was really interesting when Casino Royale came out. The core of that film was the original Casino Royale book, and it's a very good, strong story. So Fleming hit on something very powerful when he created James Bond. So as long as they don't change things too much, they can keep changing it. Yesterday was International James Bond Day, 50 years since Dr. No. And I celebrated by being driven to a very wet, grey Pinewood Studios at the end of the day, where BBC News had talked to just about everybody else in the world who had anything to do with James Bond, and they talked to me for about 30 seconds before they had to go to the weather.
Happy James Bond Day.
Happy James Bond Day. Yes, could I combine my love of zombies and James Bond? Well, funnily enough, I've just written a Miss Marple script, which is called A Caribbean Mystery, set in the Caribbean. And when I was commissioned to write it, they said, we'd quite like if you could put in real historical figures. This is quite fun to add them in to the plot. And as it was set in the Caribbean, I thought, well, the obvious person is to put in Ian Fleming, who had a house in Jamaica. And then I thought, well, if I'm putting Ian Fleming in, I might as well put James Bond in as well. Although I had to use James Bond, the American ornithologist, who James Bond got the name from, wrote Birds of the West Indies. And I thought also, as it's a Caribbean, let's put some zombies in as well. So I managed to put some zombies and James Bond in it. And then the production team said, would I like to play James Bond? So I did. I went out for a day's filming. So it was quite a lot of in-jokes involved in that. But don't despair, Agatha Christie fans. It is very faithful to the book, and I think you'll find the zombies are not gratuitous.